The problem in South Africa is not migration, right? Thabiso, if I ask you how many countries in the world have resurrected their economy by addressing migration, how many? That's why I take offense when people say Nigeria has oil. It's not as easy as just saying Nigeria has oil, because a lot is happening for them to extract that oil, or for Shell and BP and other big companies to extract that oil, but also the resources that they are putting into lobbying politicians within Nigeria is something that also makes the attainment of oil as a resource so distant from the ordinary Nigerian.
If you're so to your closer or whatever, why would you be speaking to your kids English 100% of the time?
For me, language has this aspect of having access, right? But also it has an economic value, which we cannot ignore. For those people, it's making them money. Literally, it's making them money just by speaking a few Zulu words. A white person can make money. An Indian person can be famous as a result of that.
Africans on Africa. Let's go.
Africans on Africa podcast, episode number 9. Thank you so much for everybody who has joined. And if it's your first time here, what we're trying to do with this podcast is to have conversations that nobody else has. And we try to have guests on the podcast, but also Thabiso and I try to have candid conversations about the experiences of being an African within the African continent and what that means, and some of the things that we don't talk about with regards to experiencing Africanism within the African continent. My name is Munashe, and I am an African, and we have taken the journey to try to be able to explore what it means to be African within the African continent. But if this is your first time as well, guys, why haven't you subscribed? Please subscribe to the channel, and it's easy, it's free, but also it's one of the things that makes the most difference to us as a channel as well. But in trying to have these conversations, I feel like episode 8 was a great stride in terms of us having these conversations. Thank you for everybody who has commented on the episode, but also engaged in the conversation, and also reached out to us in terms of things that you'd like to see changing and all of that. But Thabiso was not on the episode, and I'm keen to hear Thabiso's feedback on episode 8, where we spoke with Prof. Kolade. And what was your thoughts, man? I think like it's still going strong in terms of people viewing the episode and the comments that are there. Respectfully, people are providing their opinions on the episode, which I love, because what we are trying to do is create that conversation. But I want to hear from you, man. What are your thoughts on the episode so far?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good episode. I like Kolade and the way he thinks. I was also just people's feedback was a little bit how shall I say, unexpected to me. I mean, a lot of people just like the fact that he said, and I think it's South Africans like the fact that he was saying South Africans are no more xenophobic than like Nigerians, for example. And people really digging that, because I don't know, it makes people feel some type of way about always being accused of being xenophobic. But yeah, I did want to talk to you about like, because you did the interview. I wanted to talk to you about a comment that I got from the interview. So for anybody who hasn't seen the episode, so Kolade talks about things like xenophobia, and he's this like music aficionado, but also an academic Nigerian guy. Very, very, very open-minded, right? And he talks about several things. But somebody was saying that, I'll read you the comment and I'll show it to you. There's that comment. Okay, so somebody commented on that under the episode. I live in Pretoria East, and I recall a few years ago going to the stairs across from Investec to find that not only were all the delivery scooters guys outside of South Africa, as in non-South African, as usual, but inside, everyone from the tailor to the cooks was Shona Zimbabweans. This was astonishing, given that Steers was part of a publicly listed conglomerate with enough resources to appreciate that the employment of non-nationals as a criminal offense. For me, that was my moment of radicalization, for I then came to realize how huge the problem of illegal immigration is in South Africa. So what the gentleman is saying at the beginning of the interview is simply not true. And I was thinking of that, like, for someone to use a word like radicalization, bro. It's like you got radicalized into what? Into like some secret movement or
Culted.
something? Like you just realized something. You just realized something super profound that nobody ever knew before, and now you're fighting against the system, or I don't know, something revolutionary. It got me thinking in that way, because people like Kolade are not like, I don't think they're the exception. There are a lot of people who think like him, right? But a lot of us are stuck in our own circles and own echo chambers. In fact, in that episode, towards the end of the episode, when you're talking to him, he says towards the end that he thinks that people should be communicating more with others. Right? We should be communicating with each other, learning from each other. And it's what, if you look at the past episode, it's what I keep saying by the end of the episode. I think we can always learn from each other. I mean, there's also someone who said, who said in the comments, Kolade, being a music aficionado is not on the critical skills
Yeah.
list. Go home. That is funny. That's actually funny.
I think it's one of the people who comments a lot on our post, and I think it's 1 hour or something. It's a page, and appreciative of the feedback that they provide within the various episodes that we post. But two things for me that really stood out, at least responding to what you have said, and I think the comment that you're talking about refers to when Professor Kolade spoke about how South Africans are not more xenophobic than other people, I think the reaction that it got, specifically on TikTok, if you are not on our TikTok, please follow our TikTok and engage in the conversation on Africans and Africa. But what I saw with the conversation was that it seemed as if you were saying something different from what we say each and every time, And I just need to make a disclaimer. We don't hate South Africans, and we don't always speak against South Africans. Thabiso is a South African. I am a Zimbabwean. We are both proud of it, but we are having conversations that people just don't usually have, And once he said that, I think there was a comment where people said, South Africans, please gather here. Are you here? Because it was like something that has never been said. And I think also something that you spoke about is that the way he speaks about these topics is totally different from the way that we engage with these topics. That's why also I was also interested in not only in talking to him, but also within the conversation. There's a lot that I always say I learned from the conversation, which was quite good.
What do you make of his take about when he talks about the benefits of living in a country like South Africa, versus when he talks about like resources, business potential, and opportunities, and so on? What do you think? I mean, is it impossible to have those same opportunities and advantages in like Kenya, for example, or Angola?
It's not impossible, but the gap tends to extend more, right? So think of Angola and Kenya. I've had the fortune of being in both countries, and the stage at which they are in terms of progressing economically, but also opportunities for other Africans, the gap is quite a distant from where South Africa is. So you can go to Kenya, and the road for you to get to where, for example, a person like Kolade is today is not the same as the road is within South Africa. Specifically, if we talk of and think of the time that possibly he came to South Africa, and the time before anti-migrant attitudes were a thing, or were still internally expressed, if there's such a thing. I think there was a journey where Africans were welcome, but also they were welcome to build a South African economy, and in that the mines in Joburg and all those spaces were occupied, and the source of that wealth was built on the arms of other Africans, which made it easy for Africans to come, because there is a resource that they can work on, but also there is a route to which they can prosper within South Africa. A lot of the countries, some of the countries that have prospered or are still in the developmental path, have not yet paved that way, have not yet paved that channel, because either there is no aspect that is actually thriving enough to draw migrants, or the routes are not there because nobody's even coming. Like, who is going to Angola? A lot of people now are going to Kenya specifically because of possibly the tech revolution that's at Kenya, but also because Kenya is a CBD of Africa. And shout out to all our Kenyan fans, because we have a lot of subscribers who are from Kenya. So that's what I think. But also, like, in his time that he came to South Africa, it was a different conversation from a time where we can think of people who come to South Africa now.
But when you think about it, I mean, one can make the argument that a country like Nigeria, you say the roots are not there because Nigerians messed up the oil industry. A lot of people could be going there for that. I mean, Nigeria has a lot of oil, so much so that you have private citizens who are operating in basically the black market of oil, right? And it's a whole thing, but part of it has resulted. It's partly why the oil industry has become quite not only dodgy and unsafe and criminal and all of that, but it's also quite a risk for anyone across the world who wants to partake in that industry. I mean, I think about how no one speaks of Dangote anymore, you know.
And I was about to jump in with the same point. You know, I take offense at people when they say Nigeria has oil, right? Because if you really think of what that statement implies, is that how many African countries, or how many countries that have oil and do not have war at the same time, or do not have a crisis at the same time, right? We also need to look at how the influence of the West becomes a mitigating factor, especially when people have riches like oil, right? Most of the countries that I know that have oil have either wars or a crisis that is building into a civil war within the country. And the Dangote example is a perfect example, because he's the richest man in Africa. But for him to have a license to actually refine oil in Africa, to refine oil in Nigeria. So for those who don't know, Nigeria has to send its oil to the Western countries to be refined, and the oil has to be brought back to Africa for the Nigerians to use the oil. So that's why I take offense at people saying Nigeria has oil, because if a person like Dangote can't get a refinery to be set up and be run within Nigeria, what is there in terms of being economically productive from the source of oil for other Africans within Nigeria? So companies that we know about, like Shell, like BP, have maximized on oil, and they have politicized that, and they have been in a process of being able to influence the political system and influence how licenses are gotten, you know, so much so that's why I take offense when people say Nigeria has oil. It's not as easy as just saying Nigeria has oil, because a lot is happening for them to extract that oil, or for Shell and BP and other big companies to extract that oil, but also the resources that they are putting into lobbying politicians within Nigeria is something that also makes the attainment of oil as a resource so distant from the ordinary Nigerian. Look at what is happening in DRC right now with diamonds and what is called cobalt and all these resources.
Yeah, but Ivan, that's not a uniquely Nigerian problem, right? That's happening across Venezuela as well. That happened in South Africa, that happened in South Africa, even with the diamond. With diamonds when that started, right? And like you say, like from then on, nothing was smooth sailing in the society, and that was shortly followed by the apartheid system, etc. But I'm saying one can make the argument that, hey, there's that industry as just an example of one industry. And I'm saying this thinking of the argument of which was previously made. I think it was also on Colada's episode on TikTok about how foreign nationals, or rather like people, leave their countries and flee instead of fixing their own countries. And I think it's something we can talk about in relation not only to like South Africa, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, but it's happening pretty much across the world even, right? I mean the US presidential campaigns right now have that as a big topic. So what do you think of that when people say, yeah, you fled instead of staying in Zim and fixing
I
Zim?
think it's always easy to tell someone what to do if you've never been in that position, right? It's like, imagine telling someone in North Korea to go back or to stand up against Kim Jong-un in North Korea. It's an easy statement to say, especially if you're not in that situation, you know. I am not comparing any African leaders to Kim Jong-un or anything of that sort. But I think there is a platform of democracy and a platform of freedom of speech that is presented within the South African context, specifically if we look at the African continent. And that has been proven specifically by the previous election within South Africa. And if we speak from that voice, I understand where people say you should protest, you should stand, and you should do all those things. But I think we need to be cautious of telling that to someone who's in Rwanda, for example, to say you should stand up against PK, you know. And the stand up is a different cadence to what it means within the South African context. The privilege or the freedom of speech that is in South Africa is different from other societies. We are currently within this podcast utilizing the freedom of speech that is within the South African context. But if we go to other African countries, we'd have to be cautious of what we say or how we say it. You know, so I think there is that reluctancy, or I want to look at it as I don't want to use the word ignorance, but it's almost not being able to put yourself in that person's shoes and exploring their worldview from that point within which they are. You know, there are people in Africa who have relocated from their homes and they don't have homes to go back to. There are people who have relocated or migrated as a result of wars, of famine, and the situation that is happening specifically currently in the DRC, the situation that is happening in Sudan, are situations where it might be easy from a South African perspective to say go back home, but some of those people do not even have a home. So go back home is easy to say. Thabiso, I'm just thinking as we're talking that what defines privilege for me is in a very simple way of looking at it, is the ability for a white person to say a black person is lazy. You know, they can't fix the plight that they are in, and they can't just go to school and get educated and get a degree. You know, that's the same thing that I think about when people say you are not fixing your things at home. You know, and if they say you're not fixing, go back and fix things at home. It's a non-empathetic rhetoric that is said from a point of privilege, where people think they can just go into the street and they can just demonstrate and everything will be fine. You know, like nobody wants to be a migrant. Nobody wants to be a refugee. There is a reason. I always speak about the definition of migration that I use, that states that migration is a response to your current plight, and if your current plight is not livable, then you respond to it in migration. So you're telling someone who couldn't live in a certain situation to go back and fix it. Migrating means it's a response of them not being able to fix the situation or facing so much resistance to the situation that they had to stand up and leave that situation.
And you're telling people to go home where in some cases there is no home. I always go back to remember the thing I told you, the example when someone told me, you know, in Zim, if we protest, like 300 of us, they bring up 2 cops and it's demonstration over. Yeah. I always go back to that in my head. Like I think the symbolism of that makes the reality of the situation quite relatable. If you're willing to get out of your shoes and put yourself in someone else's shoes, to your point, the empathy, and to call out this point, about learning of each other's cultures and realities. When we're not talking about these conversations, when we're not having the arguments, we end up everybody's still in their own echo chamber.
Yeah. So privilege is very loud, but also privilege emanates from a point of a bit of ignorance, because privilege doesn't let you set yourself in someone else's situation. It actually lets you detach yourself from someone else's situation. So it's easy for you to say things like that. It's easy for you to use that language when you're talking to people or when you're talking about people, because you are not even making the effort of investing yourself within their situation and thinking of what that situation means. If you say go back home to someone who doesn't even have a home, if you say go fix your home to someone who has been persecuted from their home, But also there is a point that you mentioned where you said in the episode with Kolade, people were talking about how there are so many people who are working within, and I always think of the fact that we say, and that person was radicalized, right? But the problem in South Africa is not migration, right? Thabiso, if I ask you how many countries in the world have resurrected their economy by addressing migration, how many?
Yeah, I don't know.
Zero. I'm yet to be proven wrong, right? And right now, okay, we are addressing migration, and I'm not saying people should be in South Africa illegally or anything of that sort. But my point is, South Africa is currently spending about 52 million on getting people back to their countries or deporting people. Imagine how much difference that money could make to the Black community within the South African space. 52 million rand is a lot of money.
Wait, is it 52 million to get illegal immigrants out of the country?
Out of the country, and then the same people, most of them will be back by the next day anyway. So it's like addressing migration, but I don't think migration is the problem within South Africa. Right? I understand that there is a bit of a problem with migration and there's borders and everything. I'm not neglecting that, but I'm saying addressing migration is not going to raise the South African economy. That's number one. Addressing migration is going to loot into the money that is supposed to be spent on Black populations within the South African context. At least that's what I think from the numbers that I've seen.
Well, I mean, also there's a big assumption from what you're saying that it won't help the economy. I mean, you're assuming that it's being addressed to help the economy. It's a big assumption. I don't know if that's
what is it being addressed to do, because that's what I thought the conversation was always about.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that's it. And I don't think that's also like uniquely South African. Like all the countries that are like hyper, I don't think South Africa is hyper about it, but hyper like borders. I don't think the entire reason is, I was listening to Bupa and he was saying, instead of fighting that guy who's hogging all the money, we'd rather fight amongst ourselves because we're seeing these people, around us, and I'm seeing these people around me, and I'd rather fight them. Yeah. That's what I was thinking about.
Let's also get something straight. Sorry. Something that we need to get straight is that you said there are countries that are hyper migration, right? Hyper migration has been a thing that has dominated political spaces. It's a tool or a muscle for political spaces, right? So you can't say countries are hyper migration. You can say, for example, America. You can say it's hyper migration, but it is not hyper migration. It is the political discourse that is tapping into the people. And in tapping into the people, people talk about things that they don't research on or that they don't even explore in terms of the numbers.
That's precisely what I'm talking about. If I rephrase what I was saying, hyper borders. I say they're hyper borders. So that's the political rhetoric, the public discourse about our borders, protect our borders, build a wall. That's what I'm calling hyper.
Okay.
not the numbers of how many people are coming through, how many people are being sent back, whatever.
Because because the rhetoric and the numbers, they don't match up. But
yeah, well, the rhetoric doesn't really care about the numbers,
exactly,
right?
But also there is something that is happening there with the language that is going on in terms of the rhetoric of migrants, the narrative of migrants looting and all of that, which is something that I know. So for everybody who doesn't know, Thabiso has a docu-series and a docu-channel that is called The Entries. Please follow The Entries. And he posted something that we want to talk about today in terms of this aspect of the language and the politics of language, or the politics of identity. Thabiso, I'll hand it over to you, and so that you can say it in the way that you want to express it.
I want to start it here. Actually, you said something earlier about privilege, and the idea of being willing to try and put yourself in someone else's shoes, or the inability to do that, right? So this is my attempt at that, at trying to put myself in someone's shoes. I don't have children, but I'm naturally a very curious person, and basically I put up a video on TikTok, and I was asking people. I had noticed this thing. For years, I'd noticed this thing, but I just didn't have, I didn't have the balls to ask anyone personally about it. But I'd noticed this thing of Black parents in my country raising their children speaking English entirely.
I see that a lot of parents of my generation speak to their kids in English pretty much all the time. I'm curious, what's that about? When I was in school, would speak English koskolong, and then when we got home, rabu or rabulela. But I'm seeing you guys with the kids speaking English go at the mall, taxing at home, family gatherings. What's going on? And are you teaching them Sesotho, Setswana, isiZulu as well? I'm very curious about what's informing that. By the way, it's been proven again and again that kids find it much easier to be multilingual than adults. It's harder for adults to learn a second, third, fourth language. Anyway, Penny, for your thoughts.
And basically, my curiosity was about, if you're Sotho, you're Xhosa, whatever, why would you be speaking to your kids English 100% of the time? Right? And I mean, I'm talking about 100% of the time. And the response is very interesting. There's people who are going, it's just let us raise our kids however we want to, right? Which I don't like that response, because I don't like that response because there are a lot of unqualified people raising children. Fine, whatever. But the problem is when those people become adults, those children, now the rest of us have to deal with them, because leave me alone to raise my kids however I want, with my 0% knowledge and 0% life skills or whatever you may be lacking, And I think the concept of a community raising children is still beautiful. I really like that. Not that I want to participate in raising your kids, but I think a lot of people can be very helpful. So that's one of the types of responses that I got. The other response is, it's our teachers at school, right? Which made so much sense, because I have a cousin whose parents fell for the same thing. The teacher said, in order for your kid to keep up with the other children, you have to speak to them in English at home, right? So when they come to school, they can communicate clearer, better, faster, and the lessons will go smoother for them. They'll understand better because we're teaching them in English, blah, 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 right? But there are a lot of studies on early childhood development that have proven that it's much easier for children in those first 5 years, even 10, to learn multiple languages than it is for adults, because their neurons are still developing, right? You're still making the neuron connections. So it's easier for them. So the seminal study says that if at home the kid is speaking if at home the one parent is speaking English consistently and the other parent is speaking, say, isiZulu consistently, then it's easier for the kid to associate the mother with English, the father with Zulu. Every time they speak to this one, they speak in that language. Every time they speak to this one, they speak that language. But people in the comments all saying the teachers, the school, where you still have people saying, Well, in my family, it was different, right? Like me, for example, at home, we never spoke English at all. But at school, we spoke English. And I was bad with English from grade 1. I was terrible. But I learned it, and it became like the medium of thinking, medium of speaking in that context. At home, it was a different language. And there are people, by the way, I was addressing my generation specifically, meaning people like Ivan. There are people who are doing this still, and it's working, right? So, I should say, people can raise their children to speak whatever language, but arguments like it's the schooling system, or arguments like there was this other one, our children are gonna be international more so than us. I'm like, then teach them Chinese, teach them Spanish, like English. Come on. So yeah, so it's very interesting for me, because it's also, if you look at it from a bigger picture perspective, eventually we have to talk about language in Africa and the politics of language, because that's where it's going to take us. I mean, we're speaking in English right now, but we're both Africans.
Yeah.
And which in my head makes sense, because Africa is so huge. You can't expect me to speak Kiswahili and isiZulu and Shona, you know? Yeah. So that's what happened. And I wanted your view on it, Ivan. What's happening? How are you doing this as a parent when it comes to the language with your child?
I don't even know where to start, because this is a conversation that I'm passionate about. But I think an easy answer in terms of the last part that you asked is you asked how I'm doing it as a parent. I don't know, bro. I don't know what I'm doing as a parent. I don't know if I'm even a parent, right? So
you see, I love that. So, you see that? I love that.
So there's a saying in Shona.
Anyway, so sorry.
There's a saying in Shona. It says Mugoni wapwerendia sinayo, right? So the master of parenting, or the master of childolency, if there's such a word, right, is someone who doesn't have a child. Right? I had these ideas that I always had of saying, when I have a child, they're going to be speaking Shona as a first language. They're going to have this. They're going to have, I had those ideas, and my child now is 2 years and 5 months, right? But I'm currently stuck in a phase where I'm excited about anything that he says. So I can take an example of today. Today I was coming from swimming class with him, and then when I was at the door, I was trying to open the door, and I had bags and everything. He said two things that caught me in that moment, not only because of what he said, but also like I was consumed by something else maybe you would not be consumed with, right? He was speaking in English. He said to me, be patient with the door, right? And then he said to me, let me help you, right? Because he was helping me with the bags, although he couldn't lift the bag that I was holding. In that moment, I was focused on, wow, my child can say these words, but also he can communicate kindness and these complicated emotions of patience. He understands what patience is. Whatever language he said that in that moment, I didn't care. Right? Because I was thinking these things are important, and they are more important than the language that you use to communicate those things.
So that takes me to the third kind of response that I got, which was the development of my kid is more important than the language that they actually speak or communicate.
Yeah.
The fact that they can communicate.
Okay, so as I was looking at the comments on your post, there was another reason that resonated with me that you didn't add, and I thought you were going to talk about this reason. And that reason is our generation is really stuck in between a lot of generations, right? We are the only generation, Thabiso, that has lived in a world where people used to write letters, people used to write telegrams, the real telegrams. People used to have landlines, and then they had cell phones, and then they now, like, the whole AI thing is coming into existence. So there is a lot that has happened within our generation, and something that has happened is If you look at our parents or the generation of our parents and us, there is something that is significantly different. And someone said on your post that I suffered, and you said it as well. I suffered in primary school and in high school in terms of articulating myself in English, but also there was no space provided for that, and I was never told that is a requirement in life. So I don't want my child to suffer. So the reality of language is this: a language is a resource of access, right? So language is not only about you understanding me, but also it plays a role in access in every community that you are in. If you are Spitori gives you access. If you can speak Spitori, if you can code switch, by code switch I mean that people use a language in different ways. Like the Americans, when they say, "Are you all happy?" They say, "Are you all happy?" You know, they make their own rules of language. But it gives you access into a certain community, right? So if you can speak Spitori, people will say, this is one of ours, you know. But one of the few languages that has that economic value or that economic currency is English. So some parents are realistically also preparing their children for life later on, where they realistically need English, right? The question that you set up, but also I'm thinking from the reality of our parents, that question that you asked, Thabiso, is also engrossed in a lot of resistance of the English language, which I understand, can be related to the racial arrogance and the colonial arrogance of English from the past, which is where our parents are set in. And this is what I think the generation of our parents used to do. The generation of our parents used to hate English so much. And I understand why, right? And the hate for English made it so much so that in our communities, we also had a hate of English. If you speak English, or if someone speaks English, or if someone communicated in English, they'll be called a banana type, a coconut, or something that is offensive or demeaning. But later on in life, you'd realize that, wait, there is an economic value to actually speaking English, which is English being the lingua franca of the economy, but also being something that gives you value. There are only a certain group of people that have currency from speaking local languages. Do you know who those people are? White people. So white people. I saw a TikToker who was white, who was making money because of having a black accent, right? But I've also seen a lot of white people who have used the currency of language because they gained that currency through speaking either vernacular, any vernacular. It can be in Zimbabwe, it can be in South Africa. If a white person speaks vernacular, they have an audience, they can make money, people celebrate them, but we don't celebrate each other as black people.
But hold on. Hold on, you've said quite a bit. I want to respond to some of it before you get into this other thing. So the reason I asked that question, and it's to the point of like this whole, podcast thing that people do, is like learning about each other, learning about why we make the decisions we do, right? And maybe learning about each other's, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? It's that. And I realized that there's some people understood, like, oh, I'm curious. I've noted this thing. I don't understand it. Can you guys explain? Right. And then other people felt like, oh, I was attacking them. Like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing that. I'm asking why is that what you're doing? Right. Now to address what you're talking about, that our parents and English, and I want to counter. I think at some point English became like aspirational for a lot of black people, right? As in aspire to speak like, to sound like XXX. And I mean, hip hop music in South Africa had a big influence on that, right? I have this accent because of my engagement with that at the time. And people who I went to school with, some of us had this accent other ones have this other accent of ours, you know. And the only big difference between us was the kind of media we were consuming, you know, which for me is still very interesting. Now, on the issue of English, I completely hear you about economic value and currency and access, more importantly, as you say. But my question is, should it be? Not my question. My curiosity is how that seems to pretty much overwrite like home languages or mother tongues. Right? And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. You can learn English for those reasons while also learning your native tongue. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, and it's been proven that the two are not mutually exclusive.
But we don't.
Also, this thing of I suffered it in school. I don't want my kid to suffer as well. I don't know. I'm struggling to buy it because, and here's why I'm struggling to buy it. I'm not saying people's experiences are wrong or whatever. I'm relating it to my experience, and I said I had a tough time in grade 1. There was a girl next to me who kept translating and blah blah, and from the next grade I was fine and so on. Props to her, she was amazing. But I don't look back at that as like I suffered. I learned a language in a very uncomfortable context, in a very uncomfortable situation. But I learned a language, and crucially, to your point, my parents wanted me to learn that language, but they also wanted me to learn my home language.
Okay, Thabiso. So,
again,
parents, they parent from their traumas, right? I always say that I never want to be the parent who my child has to recover from, right? And there's a statement that articulates that better, right? Our parents parented from their traumas. They could see how English violated them, and they wanted you to distance as much as possible to English. But the reality of English was not detached from that, right? There's a whole another conversation of identity, which I'll get into. But also, there's never been an incentive or a reward for Black people to use their mother language. Does that make sense? Black people have never received a reward for using their mother language. So if you use Setswana or Sepedi or even Spitori, right, there is no incentive for you using that language, apart from people saying, you can go.
I disagree. I completely disagree. Okay. There's plenty of incentive.
Talk to me about it.
We have examples where you incentivize to. We have examples where you incentivize to use your mother tongue because it makes you stand out, unlike everybody else. Say maybe in an industry. I'll give you an example in the music industry, in hip hop. So when I was a teenager, you were like you were saying, right? Like for listening to hip hop, like music in English, right? You like call the coconut the cheese boy or whatever, right? Exactly what you were talking about. And then later on, now if everybody's liking hip hop, but you guys were shitting on us. But anyway, around that same time in the early 2000s, there was a movement of hip hop from Mafikeng called Motswako, right? And these guys, the thing that made them stand out was that they were rapping in Setswana. Huge incentive to be part of the hip hop community there. And that's exactly what happened. It led to more and more of them doing exactly that. Let's talk about literature. A few years ago, there was a bill regarding how we should relook medium of instruction, relook at just medium of instruction in universities, right? Part of that was looking at Afrikaans and how Afrikaans is basically put on a better position than other South African languages in universities. For example, you could submit an exam in Afrikaans, right? By the way, which for Afrikaans speaking people is freaking cool. But for everybody else, if you went to a Setswana medium of instruction school, you're in a terrible position. Or in fact, if you just went to a township school, you're in a terrible position. That led to a lot of authors either translating or writing new books, novels, textbooks in local languages. Right? Huge incentive right there to do that. In fact, I remember in my third year of university, there was a master's thesis that came out in Setswana, then another one in isiZulu. The incentive wasn't that if I write it in isiZulu, it'll be the best thing ever, or I'll be a great academic. The incentive was literally, we're thinking about doing something about languages. This is how I can participate. Maybe we'll do something better here. We're not looking for the rest of the world to speak this language. No, that's not what we're doing. And maybe it's a little bit sentimental as well. This whole thing of languages keep my language, etc. Maybe it might be sentimental as well. There's that conversation in it. I'll admit. But I don't think that there's no incentive for people to be speaking their mother tongue, wherever you are.
We have to be careful about social incentives, because in a lot of cases they are not sustainable. And I hate to say this, but let me, like the examples that you're talking about, right? If we give someone praise in our communities, it has proven to have been used against us and not have been good enough as Black people, right? So that social incentive is not good enough because it sustains the people that you spoke about, but it doesn't sustain the community. What sustains the community in a lot of cases is parents have seen that if my child can speak fluent English, or they can have good command of English, they can get a lot of jobs. They can be in many spaces. Hell, they can just get a mic and be in a podcast and, and spread the podcast around the world. So we have to be careful about how we look at these social rewards, because social rewards for me are problematic. Chimamanda speaks about how culture does not make people, it's the people who make the culture, right? And in that, there is a way a culture evolves. And a culture evolves not only because of people's identity, but also everything else that contributes to that identity, right? So I can say, for example, I'm Zimbabwean and I'm proud of being a Zimbabwean. But also the reality of that is that I need to interact with South Africans and I need to interact with a lot of people around the world. And that access for me is granted through mastering the English language, right? But also there is another element that we are not looking at, which is my 2-year, 5-month child can operate a phone, right? They can operate a phone, and they really his mastery on YouTube is like good, right? But almost everything that he watches in that moment is communicated through English. But also as parents, there's something that we do, which is if I'm busy or if I'm doing something, and if I'm the only one with my child, I'll be like, okay, let him just watch YouTube and he'll be fine. But he's also consuming a lot of information within that moment, right? You spoke about childhood development, and the brain of a human being completes its development with the frontal lobe at about 21 years, right? But 90% of that development happens before the child is like 10 years, right? And the greater bulk of that 90% happens in the first 2-3 years of their lives. So there's a lot of consuming that is happening within that moment, but also that is when they not only take up a lot, but also they are left to their own devices, so to speak, especially with technology coming in. So sometimes I always feel like I can't fight what they are consuming, because I'm like, coming with my home language here, but my child is already like consuming a lot of content, which arguably I can do a lot more to control, but it's some of those things that we are not accounting for in terms of the society that we live in, the culture that we live in currently is also influenced by those things.
Do you think he's consuming so much content in English that he can't consume any in Shona? Am I hearing you correctly?
There is not enough content in Shona, first of all.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I think we're missing half of the conversation. Let me ask you this. You mentioned that you speak English with your kid. Do you ever speak Shona to him?
Yes, I speak in English and in Shona with him.
Okay. And does his mother do the same?
Yes, she also speaks to him in Shona and in English.
Why do you speak to him in Shona? Why not just English all the time?
Because I want him to understand Shona. I want him to be at least bilingual. But also he has a nanny, and the nanny speaks to him in Xhosa. So that's another thing. Yeah. And I don't resist that because I want him to be at a minimum bilingual or multilingual.
Yeah, and he's gonna be fine. Like we were just talking. Like he's gonna. No, I mean, like in learning all those 3 languages, he's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
So that's the other half of the conversation that I think a lot of people just completely miss. It's not about it's not about you're focusing just on English. It's how you can do both. You can do the 2 languages. You can do the 3 languages. And people came out and say, "I've done it with my child. It was done with me. I'm an example of that." And I think that's the big part that a lot of people are missing. And part of it is probably the whole schooling thing. That's a problem, which is what happened with my cousins, that the teachers said, you need to speak to them English 100% of the time, even at home, blah, blah. And then they got to the point, my cousin got to the point where she couldn't communicate at all with her grandparents, which is really sad.
Yeah. So I was getting back to the point that you just mentioned in terms of grandparents, because it does take a village. And some of the things that I saw growing up, even before I was a parent, some of the things that I saw growing up, specifically within African countries, was grandparents who say, "Oh, this one doesn't speak Shona, this one doesn't speak Siswati, this one doesn't speak Tswana," and the grandparents speak to their child also in English, which is something that is also, I think that element is problematic.
Wait, the grandparents can speak English? Because I'm talking about...
They can, or in some cases they can't.
Yeah, I'm talking about those...
They can just say hi.
I'm talking about those who can't, because they can't, and then they actually unintentionally isolate the child. The child is not grandparented like the others are.
But apart from isolating, they are incentivizing that child for speaking English, and they are accommodating the child, but not teaching the child or training the child to accommodate other people or to accommodate them. With us, you would know that if you speak with your grandmother or with your grandparents, you'd speak in your vernacular, at least, and proper vernacular. Even if you mix the language with your parents, when you speak with your grandparents, you'd speak in vernacular. So I think that has created a social incentive or a social reward where children nowadays don't have to speak or learn vernac, because the grandparents they'll even force themselves if they can't speak English. But also in some cases, in a lot of cases, they can speak English, so they don't even, So we are talking about the continual dominance and colonialism of the English language, because now almost everybody can speak English language, which feels ironical because I'm using the English language,
Yeah, but
it's the continual dominance.
That's all. Yeah, I get all that, but I think I still say it's half of the conversation. I think the big problem, I don't know if it is the problem, but I think one of the issues here is just a lack of knowledge. Like, people don't know that you can fairly easily raise a child to be bilingual. It looks like people just don't know that. And I think if you're a parent and you're getting pressure from this ideal that you have or that you've grown up with, right? Of the things you're talking about, the accessibility, the kind of access you get with English, the value that comes with it, all of these things that have been ingrained in you. And on the other side, you've got teachers at school telling you, the kid has to speak English. The kid has to speak English. On the other side of that is, every time the kid is on YouTube Kids, it's English. When the TV comes on, it's English. Anything they hear in the media is English. When they buy toys, the names are English. When they play games, it's in English. When you're facing all of that, and then somebody comes and tells you, it could be quite easy for him to speak Setswana as well. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about?
But my controversial stance here is this, right? And my controversial stance is a question directed at you, Thabiso, and is, where is the problem?
I don't know if there's a problem. Remember where I started? I started to avoid such questions. Like, I started saying, I noticed this thing and it made me very curious because I'm unfamiliar with it. Is it a problem? I don't know. I don't know if it's a problem. I don't know if it's gonna be a problem.
Because there is the politics of language that we are talking about, right? But also there is the politics of identity that we are talking about. And the aspect of culture evolving, right? And we are at a different space in terms of culture. We're at a space where I was reading this article where actually people talk about people having thoughts and driving their thoughts using a language that is not their native language, which is a reality for a lot of people, right? But if it's the only aspect that we never address there is this aspect of identity. And for me, I don't, quite controversial. There's a lot of things that pin down my identity for me, right? I speak fluent Shona. I speak proper Shona, right? But my identity and speaking Shona are different things. There are a lot of people who can identify as Zimbabwean. There are a lot of people who can identify as African, but their command of Shona is different, especially in this generation. There are a lot of people who, especially if we're speaking of migration, I've seen a lot of kids who identify as Zimbabwean, but don't have the greatest command of Shona.
Look, I don't think it's controversial at all. It's happening at private schools right now with Tswana kids who don't speak any Tswana at all, but they identify as Tswana. I don't think there's anything controversial in that. In fact, I'll go as far as with culture changing and identity politics, many of the kids from today, what is it called? Generation Alpha, can at some point be at a point where they call English a native language of theirs, just because of how they've grown with it.
But also English
from zero.
But also apart from being a lingua franca within a lot of African countries, apart from French dominating African countries, apart from it being a lingua franca within African countries, it's also an official language.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that, cool, makes sense. What I'm struggling with more than anything is the lack of like bilingual. What is it? The push for that bilingualism, and the push for that, that's what I really don't understand it. And my guess is people don't know it's possible. That's my best guess. I don't know. Or people don't care. I don't know. But what I was saying earlier about these pressures, if I read those comments on TikTok, these pressures that come for parents, the pressures that these parents are facing, and then you say, oh, you can learn or should learn another language. It sounds like some more pressure actually in that context.
Yeah. So part of what I studied within my master's research, was children who serve as language brokers for their parents and friends. So migrant children, specifically from African countries, who translate and mitigate for their parents and other people, which actually showed that there's a lot of children who not only speak one language, but they speak a lot more languages than they are multilingual, right? So that's another facet that we are not looking at, because there are children specifically of migrant parents who are being raised in the South African context. Specifically, if we look at areas such as Johannesburg or Gauteng, they speak a lot more languages than other people. They speak a lot more languages than their parents.
See that?
Including their home language as well.
Yeah, see, that's fascinating for me. That's really impressive. By the way, somebody said South Africa is like the only place where you can speak 4 languages and no one is impressed.
Yeah, and it might not even be enough,
it might not even
that facet,
Yeah.
Within that facet, somebody said I was lying about this on TikTok when I was saying when people get to translate for their parents, and children get to translate for their parents, and when they get to translate for their parents, they do that to protect them from being attacked. There are people within not even Gauteng spaces, a lot of South African spaces where you speak your native language, and it's not even enough. Because it doesn't grant you access into other spaces.
No, true. Like my
that,
grandfather is 91. He had to go to the bank, sort out a bank account. He had to go with my mom so she could translate for him, because he does not speak a speck of English, but he can speak Afrikaans. He can speak Sesotho. He can understand Setswana. It's also like, to allude to what you were saying earlier. Someone also said, you can speak 4 languages and it's not impressive, but you can be white, speak only one language and have a fabulous time.
Even have an accent, and you make money. So for me, language has this aspect of having access, right? But also it has an economic value, which we cannot ignore. For those people, it's making them money. Literally, it's making them money just by speaking a few Zulu words. A white person can make money. An Indian person can be famous as a result of that.
If you could,
right? But also,
go ahead.
But also, that's what is happening with black people. They are focusing on putting food on their table. Where if my child can speak my native language, it's not going to give them a better chance of making money than if they can speak English. Whatever they want to be, whatever they can be, it has to be imbued in speaking English, and in speaking English they can make money. So those are the two things for me.
Yeah, I also do think like you're giving people a lot of credit here. I don't think a lot of people go through that thought processing. I think a lot of people are just like, I remember we talking about like our generation. I think a lot of them, especially in like middle class, or what is it called? Aspiring middle class, are just like, well, I speak like this and just continue at home, and then obviously it gets to the kids.
They do, Thabiso. I strongly disagree. And you know why I disagree? An example of why I disagree.
Wait, you're saying you think they think that far about it? You think their thought process is what you were saying, the value of English? Because that's what I was disagreeing with.
The thought process might not be like the value of English or the way that I put it. I didn't put it in a complicated way, but I'm like, the bottom line for them, right? It's like, if you look at people who aspire to be hip hop singers or the hip hop industry, right? The bottom line is money. Specifically, if you look at the hip hop industry in the context of the African continent, right? At least in the States, they lie about driving Lamborghinis and all of these things, but the Lamborghinis are within their context. In the African context, they speak about driving Lamborghinis and a lot of vehicles that are not within the African context, or not as dominant within the African context, right? Their bottom line is money. The train of thought might not be all of these things, but the bottom line is money.
You're losing me. Let me ask it in a simple man. You're grocery shopping in a Woolworths. You come across this mother. She's 28. She's with her son who's 5 years old. They're speaking English throughout. You think that woman has thought about the economic value of English and what it's going to provide for her son one day?
Yep, in a way, because they will say, if my child can speak English, they can make connections with, that's the international part.
I think
they can have access to economic doors. They can get into a lot of spaces. They can communicate with important people. It's toxic. The thinking is a bit toxic, but also
I don't know about that.
If you can communicate with important people, then it gets you landing into a space where you can make money.
I don't know if it's toxic, but here's what I think, and I'm coming to this realization as we speak. I think those reasons, when people say them, I think they post-rationalizing. And I'm talking about this particular, like, 28, what are we talking? Like 25 to maybe 40, right? That those people, like our people. I think a lot of those reasons are then post-rationalizing, giving a reason after the fact for why they're doing this. I don't think they thought of it beforehand. Hang on, let me finish the thought.
We said this on another episode. Wait, we said this on another episode. Reasoning is not equal to rational. Just because I have a reasoning of how it makes sense to me, but it doesn't have to have a rational thought to it. It doesn't have to make sense.
Cool. Okay,
Sorry, just so you go. So
here's what I think might be happening, and I'm not thinking that's everyone. What you said is also very plausible. I think there's a chance that a lot of people are speaking English to their kids because they just grew up that way. That's what they're comfortable with already. And I think some people did allude to this. I did talk about this in the comments. It's like, well, my friends and I speak English. At work, we speak English. The music I listen to is in English. Even my family, sometimes we speak English.
But Thabiso, there is a value. There is a value of access with that. You see, all the circles that you've spoken about. If you want to get access to your friendship circle, you have to speak English.
Yes, no. I'm not disagreeing with you with that. What I'm saying is, I don't think people have thought it that far about the value of it when it comes to their children. I'm saying it's happening as a result of this is what I'm already doing.
No, they have. That's why people have the dream of exiting the township and entering the gated communities. Because they want to access those circles.
Yeah, but we're talking about someone who grew up in the gated community who now has a child.
Okay. Yeah, but they don't want to get back there.
Yeah, I really don't think she's thinking about that. I think this is she's comfortable speaking in this language. She's not overthinking it about the economic value of the language for a child.
No, not overthinking. Thabiso, the thinking might not be step to step as we have broken it out to be. Yeah. But the bottom line.
Oh, no, I get you on that. Yeah, I get you on that. But I was saying this because you were saying you think they've thought it through. And that's what I was disagreeing with.
Not thought it through. The bottom line for them, the bottom line is economic, and that's where the currency is. It's like how they look down on other people who can't speak English. Yeah, they're thinking, oh, you don't know the circles that I've been in.
Yeah, that informs
you don't know the
practice
that I've occupied. So do you understand?
That
it doesn't have to have that rational breakdown, but it's like I look down on you because you don't know. That's why people say I'm the first black, I'm the only black, because they are perceiving their the economic value of their eloquence in English or ability to occupy those spaces. That's why I say the colonial dominance and the colonial fucked upness of English as a language, the arrogance of English continues to persist, and we are doing it on ourselves as black people, because what you're saying and what I'm saying, we also agree on one thing. It robs us of the value of thinking about everything and thinking about developmental channels, of thinking about culture, thinking about identity, We just think of someone who has an English accent has money. Someone who can rap has money.
It's so curious, man. It's mind-boggling for me, even now, really. I still can't make sense of it. Even after all the responses I got, I think it's actually difficult for people to confront. And yeah, I can't figure out why, man. It's so mind-boggling for me, this thing. We have so many languages, and we know so many languages. We speak so many languages. And of course, they don't have the same value in the society that we live in. But it's so easy to teach a child multiple languages. And yeah, the best way I can make sense of it is all of these things I was talking about as pressures, as pressure for people, for parents.
That's why I think, for me, it dials down to about 3 or 4 things. I think 3, which is mainly, everybody who has written a parenting book is a liar and should be arrested. I don't think there's a plan to this parenting thing, because personally I'm also still being parented. I also rely on my parents for a lot of things. So that's the first essential thing for me. But the second thing is our communities, our cultures are evolving, and language evolves with that. And in evolving, I think different contexts evolve differently, and in that evolution process, I think a lot of parents are trying. I have this perception of being left out, and they don't want to be left out.
What do you mean left
And
out?
the last, they don't want their children to be left out. I
Oh.
started comfortably speaking English after high school, like even using English after high school, and I felt like there's a lot of things that I missed out as a result of that. So some parents would be like, I don't want my child to feel like that, as the comments have said. And the last thing for me is there is a genuine currency in language, all languages, and that currency is utilized or tokenized differently. Like we spoke about, there is a currency in white people speaking African languages because people celebrate that. But if you speak English as a black person, people will not really celebrate that. But there is a perception of being paid, of getting access to other spaces as a black person. And a lot of people are stuck, and a lot of black parents are stuck in that dynamic where they want their child to also be able to access those spaces. So for me, those three things are really important in terms of explaining why children are speaking more of English than vernacular language.
Before we wrap up, can I ask you something? If you could learn a language in the next 2 years, which one would you want to learn?
Can I choose two? I've already thought about it.
Okay, two. Yeah.
Espanol and Kiswahili.
I think Spanish is a good one. Yeah, definitely. But I want to learn Pidgin. Pidgin English.
That's a good one.
Yeah. If I
That's a good one.
could get a proper hold of Pidgin, man, it's so beautiful, bro.
That's a good, and also that's also like not only African, like that goes like in a lot of places.
Don't they speak that in like? Don't people in the Caribbean have Pidgin?
I think patois is mixed with pidgin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I think you might be right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good one. That's a good
That
one.
Pidgin is beautiful, man. Yeah.
And and I'm glad like we speak about these things because as much as there is no response to what we are talking about, there's also an integral part of things that parents think about every day, and a lot of guilt that African parents go through in terms of, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? I think they like there's always that struggle, and I think it's figuring it out every day. For me, at least, that's what parenting is. As long as you're making an effort to figure it out. There are people who stop trying to figure it out. That's where the problem. For me, that's where the only problem is. If you can communicate with your child, if you can talk to your child, then for me, I don't have a problem. I don't see where the problem is.
Yeah, just don't write a book about it.
And if your children are kind, and if your children are honest and modest citizens, don't write a book about. Nobody is figuring it out, like relationships and parenting.
It's crazy. In the relationship books, it's like, okay. Why do you have so many of them? Like, Jesus.
So we're not gonna write any books. So we are trying to be in a space where we also write articles that speak to some of the conversations that we are having here. So we are also calling up on a lot of people who are thought leaders, people who are researchers, people who have done work on these conversations to also work with us to make sure that we bring these conversations to something that is fruitful and real information that people can actually read about.
And if you haven't watched the previous episode, I implore you to go check it out. There's a reason we started with talking about it. It's pretty good. And I think you should watch it, man. It's actually fascinating stuff. I always like it when we get to talk to people who are like much older than us. I hope Kolade doesn't hear me saying much older. But yeah, worth a watch. Do check it out, especially people if you're from Nigeria. Have a look.
I always like it when we speak to people who are much wiser than us. And I really enjoyed that episode as well. And please have a look. But also I want to appreciate everybody who has taken time to engage with us, to comment on the episode, to comment on our TikTok. Regardless of the negative comments and the positive comments, we are really appreciative of opening up the space where we can talk about these conversations and have these conversations within the African space. And please keep on commenting. Please keep on engaging with us within these conversations. And as I always am saying, like, if you haven't subscribed, guys, it's the easiest thing to do. Just click that subscribe button. It's easy, it's free, but also it's something that makes a whole lot of difference to our channel and what we are trying to build up here. Thabiso, thank you so much for bringing up this conversation and talking about this experience. Like, guys, if you haven't checked out Thabiso's channel, which is called The Entries on YouTube and TikTok, please check it out. There is a lot of engaging content that is there in terms of not only within the African space, but also specifically within the South African space, and some of the challenges that are happening within the South African space, and some of the conversations that need to be had within the South African space.
Also, tell us in the comments tell us in the comments how you're dealing with this parenthood and language thing. I'm very interested in people's experiences. Yeah, but otherwise, for me, Thabiso, thank you.
I don't think I've shared enough as a parent. I don't know what I'm doing as a parent, but that's at least how I think about things. I've been Munashe Kastere. I am an African, and thank you so much for reaching to this point of the episode. Cheers.